from South Africa.
Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views with myself, Saai. The time is 9:30 Central African time, and we're going to be switching gears now to a very, very important topic. South Africa's foot and mouth disease outbreak is fast becoming more than an animal health issue. It's now a full-blown survival crisis for farmers in the affected areas of South Africa. It's threatening livelihoods, food security, and confidence in the state's ability to manage agricultural emergencies. Following Minister Johnson Hazen's recent media briefing, farmer organizations say they were left with more questions than answers and very, very little reassurance that the crisis is being brought under control. The South African Agricultural Initiative, or SAAI, has responded quite sharply in warning that trust in the Department of Agriculture is at rock bottom at this point. Vaccine capacity is dangerously inadequate and legal action may be unavoidable. And joining us now is Francois Rassouw, CEO of Southern Africa Agricultural Initiative, and he'll be giving us a bit more insight on what's the plan, essentially. What measures are they going to be putting in place to make sure that the Department of Agriculture is held accountable and is being pushed to mitigate a crisis that is seemingly getting out of control. Francois, thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to News and Views. Really appreciate you giving us your time.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Francois, let's start with the reality on the ground. From your organization's perspective, how severe is the foot and mouth disease crisis right now, and which parts of South Africa are mostly the most affected?
Yeah, so this is the worst biosecurity disaster we've seen in more than a century in South Africa. It has now reached 8 out of the 9 provinces, and it's effectively everywhere. Unfortunately, I cannot tell you exactly in what regions, because only it's definitely less than 10% of cases are officially reported. Because the main reason for this is if a farmer reports this, their farm gets quarantined and basically gets shut down for the next 8 to 12 months. So it is going to be an unmitigated disaster. Unfortunately, we are only at the beginning of this. There's been no vaccines in the country since middle of December. We have still not received any vaccines, and there is no rollout plan or timelines currently available to know what and how we are going to curb the spread of this pandemic.
You've described this as a survival crisis for farmers. What does that actually mean in practical terms? Is it financially, operationally, emotionally, farmers are being affected, or it's a combination of everything?
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's definitely a combination. So you must first remember we have the disease now decimating cattle herds across the country. The hardest hit at the moment are the dairy cattle, and most of them are in the Eastern Cape and in especially KwaZulu-Natal areas. In previous outbreaks, we've never seen cattle die of the disease, but now they are dying in the hundreds and thousands. And this leads to especially a loss of production, because that is what the sickness does. It infects the mouth, the tongue, the hooves. And because of that, the cattle lose their shape and their production capabilities. Now, that then leads to a knock-on effect, which makes it not profitable for farmers to farm cattle anymore. So first, you have the damage of farmers who lose cattle and who lose entire herds or breeding herds. And then second, you have the one where farmers just say, well, it's not profitable for me to farm this anymore because I'm paying more than I'm getting, so I'm stopping with production. And that will then lead to a knock-on effect where next year or the year after we have too few cattle in production, and we as consumers will pay more for meat. But this goes a bit further than that as well. The sickness is extremely communicable. It spreads very easily. And the wool industry will be hit next. And then after that, anything that these cattle, and especially communal cattle, touches, every type of silage that we export will have the effect of this disease. So it is really an unmitigated disaster that we are facing.
Mm, mm, mm. I think it was sometime last week when the Minister of Agriculture, Johnson Hazen, had that media briefing to try and almost give insight on how government is going to be responding to this crisis. You guys came out and said, you were left disappointed. There were more questions than answers. From your perspective, what specifically was missing from that briefing from the Minister of Agriculture?
Okay, I'm going to give you a breakdown of what the minister's speech is always about. First of all, he says we've now decided to vaccinate the national herd instead of acting reactively to outbreaks. Then he says we've got a 10-year plan that is broken into 3 compartments, and as a result of this 10-year plan, we will be able to export our meat again and get a foot and mouth disease-free status from WOA, and then the rest of the world will enjoy our meat. And we are going to do this in participation with the private sector. That's his speech. There's nothing about when is the vaccines getting here, who is going to procure the vaccines, because as we saw yesterday, the minister did a total 180-degree. He brokered a deal with the Argentinians behind private industry's backs, although he's confirmed on many television programs, including Carte Blanche on Sunday, that he is going to use these private sector industries who has all the necessary hardware capabilities. They can keep the cold chain intact. They do have the logistics. They have everything that government facilities that like OBP has not. But now he has turned his back on them and decided, no, OBP this time, they will get it right. So there's a failure to communicate that. There's a failure to say where they are going to start vaccinating and how they are going to vaccinate. How are they going to channel 6 to 8 million communal cattle into some kind of space to vaccinate them and then to give them the required F burn mark? So it sounds great. And if nobody asks further questions, it's easy to take that as, oh, but they've got a plan. We don't need a 10-year plan. That 10-year plan was written on 6 pages. We need an action plan for this week, for tomorrow. There are already farmers who have been infected for the 2nd time now, and they vaccinated with a BVI vaccine. They've already lost most of their herd. There are farmers that have been closed down for 8 months now. They can't pay their wages. They can't pay their electricity bills, children's school fees. They are selling their farms now. So this is not something where you can say, yes, but we've got a plan, trust us. There's no communication to the industry or to farmers of what is the rollout plan. And that is the most frustrating thing at the moment.
I want to jump quickly to the vaccine conversation because you touched on it quite extensively. You guys came out and said you appreciate the fact that vaccines from Brazil and Turkey have been sourced, but you also said they're not enough. Why is there a seemingly bottleneck when it comes to sourcing the vaccine? What's the reason behind that?
No, there's sufficient vaccine out there. I mean, just the Biogenesis Bago company can send 25 million doses once an order is placed. But the order can only be placed once a deposit is made and money is paid into their account. And the private sector was willing to do that. But then the minister and his department went around private sector's back and said, we're not willing to work with the private sector. We would prefer if you work directly with us. Biogenesis has not worked with any government in the 30 countries that it currently does business with. And that's the bottleneck. Government now, they want to handle this crisis on their own. They insist on being the sole procurer and distributor of vaccines. And I've seen this play out before, especially with the African horse sickness vaccine and undersupport biological products, or OBP, where they say, yes, we do have vaccines, and we ask, but can we get access to them? Can we buy them? And they say, no, you can't. And then we ask them, but then you don't have vaccines. And they said, no, just because you can't buy them doesn't mean we don't have them. And that is the frustrating thing when it comes to this. And why would you need to add more role players to the value chain? That is only going to add to the cost of this. So we don't understand why it's not possible for a farmer to give his private veterinarian instruction to buy it from a local supplier of the vaccine, because it will get to farmers quicker, and we will ensure that the minister's strategy of inoculating the whole national herd gets done within 6 months' time.
You've also came out and warned that if vaccine production isn't urgently expanded into the private sector, you may force the state's hand through the courts. Where are we when it comes to that perspective? Is there legal action that has been now put on the table? And how far along are you with it? And what are the demands?
Yeah, so first of all, it's our court action revolves around getting to the quickest route for farmers to get access to vaccines, and that means private procurement and distribution. So that's what the court case revolves around. Production is a 12 to 2 year plan that's not going to see the light of day. Not even government's own plan to produce 20,000 vaccines a week is going to be operational within the next 3 to 6 months if they start the building and all of their plans right now. So that is our route to court. We've consulted with all industry role players on Monday. We are now busy with preparing papers, but unfortunately the ground is moving beneath our feet as the minister makes different announcements and gets pseudo studies on what should be the right thing, and unfortunately we need to answer most of those things in our court papers, and that's what takes time.
The minister came out also and then condemned organizations like yourselves going to court. He feels like this is a time where everyone should be collaborating, working together, and not taking legal action against each other. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, the minister has zero concept of how the legal system works. There is nothing prohibiting him from taking action now. He should actually be appreciating the fact that we want to go to court to get a declarative order to saying that there is currently no prohibition for farmers to preemptively vaccinate their herd to protect them from the coming foot and mouth disease. He should actually be thanking us for getting clarity on the current legislation, because he just doesn't have the guts to make that decision himself. So first of all, him saying that no, it will delay the rollout of the vaccines is a dereliction of duty, and we will take him to court for that on a separate matter, because that means he's not doing his job. But I think he mustn't make statements like this if he doesn't understand the legal position. Instead, I would urge him to use his energy and try and fix this crisis that he has gotten us into.
It almost feels like confidence in the Department of Agriculture, confidence and trust in the Department of Agriculture amongst farmers is extremely low at this point. I mean, the sentiment when you talk to farmers, you talk to organizations like yourselves, is it because of this particular crisis, or is it something that has always been happening? It's more deep-seated. It stems from previous ministers of the department and how they've interacted with farmers across South Africa, or something else got us to this point?
Yeah, that's a very good question. First of all, it is important that the main factor that contributed to this whole crisis is the declining state of the state veterinary services over the past 20 years. That is the reason why we are here. But for the past year and a half, we have warned that this crisis is coming because we saw where the outbreaks are. And we said that if nothing is done, if it's just talking and appointment of task teams and plans that will be discussed, this crisis could get worse. We didn't think it would get this worse this quick, but it's because of inaction from the department and holding media briefings every second week to condemn those who are asking critical questions. That is the reason why we are in this predicament at the moment. And it is easy to get handles on foot and mouth disease. If you contain it within the first 24 to 48 hours, as there are already procedures for, then you can stop this disease in its tracks. But unfortunately, those procedures are not implemented within the department and the veterinary services department, and that is why we are here. So yes, farmers have lost a trust in the department and in the minister of how they handled the situation. And I can tell you, we are not even at the start of quantifying the damage that is going to occur, because we don't know where this disease is. We don't know how many farms have been affected, and it's still only starting to play out. And we will only realize what the effect of this was in 6 to 12 months' time.
One thing which I thought was really, really interesting was the fact that one of your key criticisms is the lack of a plan for stray cattle, for communal areas and informal settlements. There doesn't seem to be a plan around mitigating the disease on that front. Why is this so important and very, very, very key to some of the concerns that you're raising?
Yeah, that's a crucial question, because all of this goes about the spread of the disease. This disease spread because of cattle that moves between towns and interprovincial travel. And in order to contain this disease, you have to have blockades. You have to have provincial blockades. You have to have one on each side of towns, in between farming communities, because you need to stop those cattle. You need to check the necessary paperwork, and you need to stop communal cattle that are walking in the roads and in between farms, because that is how and why the disease has spread. It's because of the movement, the unauthorized movement of cattle in the country. So that is also why it is so frustrating that the Department of Agriculture has made no attempt to contact the South African Police Service or the SANDF and ask them, please assist us with putting up blockades, because that is the quickest way to stop this disease from spreading.
I saw some of the 12 core requirements that you guys have put out for the Minister of Agriculture. Amongst them is a clear plan for financial assistance of some sort to affected farmers to try and help them survive while the operations are being effectively paralyzed. Another one is information on how, and I think this is important, information on how the national state of disaster will make a tangible difference to the dairy, meat, and pork industries in South Africa. I can't read all of them, but if from the 12 core requirements, if you had to prioritize just one or maybe three that you feel must happen immediately, what would those be and why?
Yeah, the first one is let the private sector do their job. Sign all the necessary permits, because although he's been saying this on each and every interview, it's 5 months later, and not one of those permits are, I think only some of the SAPRA permits have been signed, but the necessary permits to bring vaccines into this country have not been signed off. And to enable these private companies to procure them, but also for them to send it to the necessary private veterinarians. We need to use the private veterinary network in this country to assist in vaccinating the national herd. But then, and I'm receiving calls every day from distressed farmers, because remember, this is not like a drought where farmers can sell off their livestock to get cash flow. Everything is stopped. You cannot sell any of your cattle during this crisis if you are under quarantine. So from that moment on, you have no source of income, and that could last for between 8 and 12 months. And we need some kind of financial assistance, whether it be through disaster aid. And the biggest problem in South Africa is once a state of disaster is declared, they think, that is the extent of the issue. There's never any financial compensation or assistance, although it is provided for in legislation. So we do need some kind of financial bridge for farmers from now until this disaster has ended. And we do see that private sector and private industry and companies and banks are communicating and talking to farmers to assist them. But that can only go on for so long. And this is not something that will be solved in 2 or 3 months. This is going to take a year or maybe 2. For all this, for things to maybe get to some sort of normalcy.
There's been claims that farm organizations like yourselves are spreading a lot of disinformation, or even, exploiting the situation, exploiting the crisis, for whatever nefarious reasons. How damaging do you think those accusations are, especially at a moment like this? And what do you think is the reason behind those kind of accusations being thrown out there?
So first of all, there's been zero criticism on our approach to how we said this foot and mouth disease outbreak should have been handled. They say the words, and especially the minister, like disinformation, and he uses stuff like that, but he never clarifies. He uses these couple of statements that says why he cannot allow the private industry to assist. He says no, because you can use the vaccines to create bioweapons. That's absolute rubbish. If I wanted to create a bioweapon, I would take a vial of blood from an infected cow, and I would go and use it in a country where this would actually be damaging, like Australia or America. That is how you use it for a bioweapon. We are letting farmers vaccinate for stuff that are related to ricin and or some of these other very damaging diseases. So there's no excuse like that. And then, we are only one of a few countries in the world where we still demand that private vaccine production be done. There's no reason for us to insist on private vaccine production here in our country. And then the third thing is the minister says we're going to lose our status at WOA because we don't do sufficient monitoring. That's also rubbish. We must first stop the disease. We must first inoculate the national herd, and then we can start the monitoring to say that for between 12 and 24 months, there has been no active cases of foot and mouth disease. And all our private veterinarians have the traceability functions to know what vaccines they sent to who and what cattle were vaccinated. So I would say that the person spreading the disinformation is the minister himself, because he makes up these absolutely rubbish claims that have no basis in science or in law for why he cannot do these things. The fact is he wants to centralize vaccine procurement, and we are going to pay a hefty price for that. And the only person losing at the moment is the minister, because the farmers are seeing what's happening on the ground. They are losing cattle on a daily basis. They are seeing their neighbors becoming despondent and depressed about the situation, and the minister is just not doing anything about it.
No, Francois, I'm going to leave it there for now. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us your time and for those very, very important insights. It'll be interesting to see how the minister continues to try and deal with the situation, considering the headaches that he has on the political front. So good luck on trying to, get him to talk to you. He's stepping down with the DA, and it's a whole other mess. But we'll definitely be chatting to you to get any kind of update. Really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Have a good day.
There you go, Francois Rassouw, CEO of the South African Agricultural. Southern African Agricultural Initiative, giving us insight on, I think, what is a silent kind of disaster that's about to happen. The foot and mouth disease in South Africa, the outbreak is getting out of hand, and it has exposed some very, very deep cracks in South Africa's agricultural crisis management. But it looks like with the court action that's currently looming, and the vaccine shortages persisting, and the trust between farmers and the state at an all-time low, we are not anywhere near a solution, and it's going to be affecting us very, very soon, because prices of meat are going to be going up, because farmers are losing. They're losing cattle. They're spending more on trying to mitigate the disease, and the Department of Agriculture seems to not have their hold on this crisis. And one almost understands why, looking at John Steenhuisen and some of the issues that he has politically with the DA and the GNU and the mess that's happening around there. It almost feels like this is not a priority for him, and it should. this should be the number one priority, and it should be dealt with quite extensively before it gets out of hand. Otherwise, we've come to the end of today's edition of News and Views. Thank you so much for staying with us for the past 2 hours or so. I'll be back with you again on Thursday for the Thursday edition of the show. There's some breaking news. It looks like South Africa has secured an AGOA lifeline, but only for 1 more year. South Africa remains part of the Africa Growth and Opportunity Act after U.S. President Donald Trump signed a spending bill extending the trade deal for 1 year through 2026. And essentially, it means restoring duty-free access to the world's biggest consumer market, which is the United States of America, for South African exporters. And the move provides short-term certainty for trade, but I think it leaves a lot of question marks when it comes to longer-term access and broader economic relations with the U.S. remaining uncertain. So yeah, we're still part of AGOA for now. It looks like Donald Trump has given us some grace, but the question remains, for how long? Thank you so much for staying with us. For myself, Pooty behind the desk, Nasreen produced the show. We'll be back with you again tomorrow. Shap shap.